Imagine stepping into a room where, where literally every single person there is actively plotting your downfall.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is not a room you want to be in.
Right. And instead of, trying to de-escalate things or just looking for the nearest exit, you just grab the microphone, look directly at your enemies, and systematically take control of the room.
It's an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare.
It really is. And that warfare is exactly what we are getting into today for you, the listener.
Mm.
We have this fascinating prep document breaking down the events of Matthew chapter 22, and our mission for this deep dive is to decode the high-stakes political chess moves happening right beneath the surface of this ancient text.
Yeah, and to really grasp the gravity of this text, you have to mentally place yourself in that environment. I mean, it is Passover week in the Jerusalem temple.
Which means it's packed, right?
Oh, completely. The city is just overflowing with pilgrims who have traveled from all over the known world. And because of the festival, messianic expectations, the desperate hope for a liberator to overthrow the government, they are at an absolute fever pitch.
And chronologically in the source material, this is happening just days before the crucifixion of Jesus. So the tension is just palpable.
Exactly. It's a powder keg.
Now, before we jump into the deep end here, I want to offer a quick but really essential disclaimer. In this deep dive, we are going to discuss some intense political factions, the brutal realities of Roman occupation, and these fierce religious power struggles as they are outlined in our source document.
Yeah.
And we want to make it incredibly clear to you that we are simply reporting the historical and political dynamics as they are presented in this text. We're not endorsing any specific viewpoints, taking sides, or pushing any sort of religious or political agenda. We are just here to explore the fascinating ideas and the sheer strategic maneuvering contained in the original source.
Yeah, because treating this text as a strategic document really does reveal a level of coordinated attack and defense that frankly rivals any modern political thriller.
It really does.
Like, if you read this casually, you might just see a simple religious Q&A session.
Hmm?
But if you actually look at the factions involved, you realize this is a coordinated assassination attempt disguised as a theological debate.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get to the famous verbal traps that you might have heard of, we really have to understand the environment and exactly how Jesus opens this dialogue.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't wait for them to attack.
No, not at all. He fires the opening salvo.
And to understand why his opening move is so explosive, you have to grasp the culture of the first century Mediterranean world. This was fundamentally an honor-shame culture.
Right, which is very different from how we operate today.
Completely different. In this world, a public debate was not just an exchange of ideas where people agreed to disagree. It was a cutthroat social contest. Honor was viewed as a finite resource, almost like currency.
So if someone gains honor, someone else literally has to lose it.
Exactly. If you gained honor in a public debate, it meant your opponent physically lost it. Your social survival depended entirely on not losing face in public.
Wow. And Judea at this time is, as you said, a complete powder keg. They are living under the crushing weight of Roman occupation, specifically under the procurator Pontius Pilate, who ruled from AD 26 to 36.
Right, and the religious elites in Jerusalem are trying desperately to maintain their grip on power while keeping the Romans happy enough not to, send in the legions.
Yeah, and into this incredibly volatile tinderbox walks Jesus. And he opens his public debate with the parable of the wedding banquet.
Right. He looks directly at the religious leaders of the nation, standing in their own temple courtyard, and tells a story about a king who invites guests to a grand wedding banquet.
And those guests represent the religious elites. Right.
Exactly. And in the story, they violently reject the invitation. They even kill the king's messengers. So the king's response is to send his army to completely destroy their city.
That is quite the escalation.
It is. Then the king tells his servants to go out into the streets and invite absolutely anyone they can find to the banquet. The only condition for these new guests is that they must be wearing a wedding garment of righteousness to enter.
Let's put that in a modern context so you can feel the sheer audacity of this move. It would be like a corporate whistleblower walking into a hostile press conference, standing at the podium, and opening their speech with a thinly veiled story about how the entire executive board sitting in the front row is hopelessly corrupt.
Yeah, like they're about to be federally indicted and lose everything.
Exactly. You just don't do that unless you are intentionally inviting a total war.
And what adds an incredible layer of gravity to this is the prophetic reality of the parable. Our source document points out that this story of the king destroying the city directly foreshadows the actual historical destruction of Jerusalem and the temple.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that devastation happened just a few decades later in AD 70 at the hands of Roman forces under Titus. The text frames this historical destruction as a direct consequence of the elites rejecting God's messengers.
When you view it through the lens of history, that is a chilling prediction. And Jesus wraps up this opening parable with a very specific warning in Matthew 22, verse 14. He says, "For many are invited, but few are chosen."
What's fascinating here is how this parable instantly sets the stage for the rest of the chapter. That statement, many are invited, but few are chosen, is a profound warning.
How so?
Well, it emphasizes that while God's invitation is broad, going out to the people on the streets, just receiving the invitation isn't enough. There is a mechanism of response required. You have to actively put on the wedding garment. You have to respond appropriately.
So he's calling them out directly.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
By telling the story, Jesus has just publicly humiliated the religious leaders and prophesied their violent end. In an honor-shame culture, they cannot just let that slide. They are forced to strike back.
which brings us to the first wave of attackers. And the source notes that it's a shocking team-up. We see the Pharisees and the Herodians form an alliance to trap him. But wait, earlier in the document, it notes the Pharisees were anti-Rome, and the Herodians literally take their name from Rome's puppet king, Herod. Why on earth would mortal political enemies suddenly start working together? That makes no sense.
It really speaks to the level of threat they perceive. I mean, you have the Pharisees, who were essentially religious populists. They were loved by the common people and deeply resented the Roman presence.
Right.
And then you have the Herodians, who were pro-Rome political operatives. Their wealth and power came directly from collaborating with the Roman Empire, so they absolutely despised each other.
But they team up anyway.
Yes, because they both realize Jesus is a bigger threat to their respective power bases than they are to each other. So they concoct a perfectly engineered lose-lose scenario.
The ultimate trap. They approach Jesus and ask him if it is lawful to pay the imperial poll tax to Caesar.
It is a masterpiece of political maneuvering. Here is the mechanism of the trap. If Jesus says, yes, you should pay the tax, the anti-Roman Pharisees will immediately brand him a Roman sympathizer.
Oh, and then he loses all his credibility with the crowds.
Exactly. And the crowds hated that tax. Without the crowds to protect him, his movement dies. But if he says, no, do not pay the tax, the pro-Rome Herodians are standing right there to bear witness.
And they would immediately have him arrested by the Roman authorities for inciting rebellion and treason.
Precisely.
It's like asking a politician on live TV if they support a controversial war. If they say yes, their grassroots voter base abandons them completely. If they say no, their wealthy donors pull all their funding and destroy their career.
That's a great analogy.
And there is a crucial visual subtext here regarding the physical coinage itself. The tax had to be paid with the Roman denarius. This coin bore the stamped image of Caesar, along with an inscription declaring Caesar to be the son of a god.
Right, which was a massive issue.
Yeah, for strict Jews, simply carrying this coin was viewed as a direct violation of the commandment against graven images.
Every time you bought food or paid a tax, you were forced to handle this little piece of blasphemous propaganda. It was a daily, humiliating reminder of their subjugation to a foreign pagan power.
So Jesus doesn't just answer them. He asks them to produce the coin used for the tax. Someone reaches into their robe and hands them a denarius. He looks at it and asks them, whose image is this? And whose inscription?
And they are forced to answer, Caesar's.
And then Jesus delivers this masterful evasion. Matthew 22.21 says, then he said to them, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's.
He completely short-circuits their lose-lose scenario. He essentially tells them, if this piece of metal has Caesar's face stamped on it, give it back to him. He can have his idolatrous money.
Right.
But you bear the image of God, so give your life, your loyalty to God. He sidesteps the political treason trap entirely while making a profound theological point that the populist Pharisees can't possibly argue against without looking like hypocrites.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the political assassination attempt has failed entirely. The Pharisees and Herodians retreat. But if you can't get a populist arrested for treason, your next best move is to destroy his credibility, right?
Exactly. You have to make him look stupid in front of his followers.
So the aristocratic elites decide to try their hand, shifting the warfare from politics to theology. Enter the Sadducees.
The Sadducees are a completely different breed from the Pharisees. They were the wealthy, elite temple priests. Their immense power and wealth relied entirely on maintaining a fragile, cooperative peace with Rome.
So they were the ones really in charge of the temple.
Yes, they controlled the temple economy. To them, Jesus, this populist rabbi from Galilee who has been turning over tables and stirring up the crowds, is a massive, direct threat to their control.
And their theology was different too. Huh?
Very different. Crucially, the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. They only accepted the first 5 books of Moses, and they didn't see the afterlife in there.
So their tactic is a public humiliation play. They come to Jesus with an incredibly convoluted hypothetical question about marriage. They ask about a woman who marries 7 brothers in succession because they keep dying, and they want to know whose wife she will be in the resurrection.
Yeah, let's look at the mechanism of why they thought this was such a good trap. They are using the law of Moses, specifically the law of levirate marriage found in Deuteronomy.
Okay.
This law stated that if a man died childless, his brother must marry the widow to provide for her and carry on the family line. It was an ancient social safety net.
Right, but they twist it.
Exactly. The Sadducees take this compassionate law and stretch it to an absurd extreme. 7 brothers all marry the same woman and all die. They are trying to use Moses' own words to prove that the concept of a resurrection is mathematically and morally impossible. They are mocking him.
They just want the crowd to laugh at him. But Jesus dismantles their argument by telling them they don't know the scriptures or the power of God. He explains that the resurrection reality operates on an entirely different plane than earthly marriage. He tells them that in the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels.
He completely swats away their earthly premise.
Yeah, he shows them that they are trying to apply the rules of a caterpillar to a butterfly.
That's a great way to put it. He doesn't just answer their hypothetical, he exposes the flaw in their underlying logic. They assumed the afterlife was simply an eternal continuation of this life, with all its earthly institutions intact. By explaining how the resurrection actually works, he entirely short-circuits their puzzle.
So the Sadducees fail, and they fail publicly. Seeing this, the Pharisees decide to return for one more shot. They pivot away from politics, away from ridiculous hypotheticals, and test him strictly on the core of the law.
Right.
They ask him, out of the hundreds of laws in the Torah, which is the greatest commandment?
And this is a massive theological test. I mean, there are 613 individual laws in the Torah. Rabbis had debated for centuries about which ones were the heavy laws and which were the light laws.
So it's another trap.
Completely. Pick the wrong law to elevate, and you alienate a massive faction of the scholars. If you say Sabbath keeping is the most important, the purity scholars attack you. If you say temple sacrifices, the moral philosophers attack you.
But Jesus bypasses the menu entirely and goes straight to the operating system of the law. He replies in Matthew 22:37-39, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself."
Right.
Why is this such a brilliant distillation? Why does this answer silence the debate?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Jesus isn't just giving a nice feel-good platitude. He is providing the mechanism upon which the rest of the law functions.
Interesting.
He explicitly states that all the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. He is arguing that if you genuinely love God with everything you have, and you genuinely love your neighbor as yourself, you will automatically fulfill all the other 611 micro-laws.
Oh, because you won't steal from your neighbor if you love them.
Exactly. You won't worship idols if you love God. He synthesizes centuries of legalistic debate into 2 foundational relational principles. It's unassailable logic.
This brings us to the turning point of the chapter. Up until this moment, Jesus has spent the entire day on defense. He has just been fielding attacks from every major power player in Jerusalem.
Yeah, they've been relentless.
But now, with all of them gathered around him, he turns their own weapons against them.
Yeah.
He launches a counteroffensive.
The religious leaders have thrown everything they have at him. They are exhausted, out of ideas, and their honor has taken a massive hit. That's exactly when Jesus decides to go on the offensive.
He turns to the Pharisees and asks them a question about the identity of the Messiah. He quotes Psalm 110. In Matthew 22:44, he says, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet."
Right.
He points out that King David himself, the author of the psalm, calls the Messiah Lord. So he asks them the simple question, if David calls the Messiah his Lord, how can the Messiah merely be David's son?
This is a brilliant theological checkmate. You see, the Pharisees believed the Messiah would simply be a human descendant of King David, like a military leader who would overthrow Rome and restore the kingdom.
But Jesus flips that.
Yes, by using their own revered scriptures against them, Jesus is establishing a mechanism of authority. He is proving that his messianic authority surpasses even that of King David.
Wow.
He isn't just a political liberator in the human line of David, he is establishing a divine authority that predates and supersedes their greatest earthly king. If David calls him Lord, his authority comes from God, not from a human bloodline.
Let's bring this historical drama to its absolute peak, because you really have to visualize this moment to appreciate it. Jesus is standing in the temple courtyard. He's surrounded by the most educated, powerful, and dangerous men in the entire nation.
The absolute elite.
Yeah, these are men who are actively, desperately hunting for a reason to have him executed. And instead of giving them one, he systematically and publicly dismantles all three of their major factions. He breaks the political trap of the Herodians, he exposes the theological ignorance of the Sadducees, and he dismantles the legalistic framework of the Pharisees.
It's incredible.
By doing this, he strips them of their honor in a culture where honor was literally everything.
This raises an important question about human nature and the inherent danger of humiliating powerful men.
Oh, definitely.
The chapter ends in what the source document describes as a chilling silence. Matthew notes that from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. They were completely silenced.
But silence isn't a good thing here, is it?
No, in an honor-shame culture, silence isn't submission. The sheer, devastating public humiliation they just suffered doesn't make them reconsider their theology. It directly fuels their plot to murder him. They realize they cannot beat him in a public debate, so they resolve to kill him in private.
So what does this all mean? Obviously, the stakes for you listening aren't first-century Roman executions. But the historical drama here offers an incredible look at how to navigate highly polarized environments.
Absolutely.
Think about when you face loaded questions at work or bad faith arguments designed strictly to trap you. The text shows a masterful ability to identify the false premise of a trap like the coin tax or the absurd marriage scenario and reframe the entire conversation on your own terms.
Yeah, setting your own frame is key.
But there's also a sobering reality you have to take away from this. Sometimes brilliant answers don't actually pacify your critics. Proving your detractors completely wrong doesn't necessarily change their hearts. Sometimes it just changes their tactics from public debate to private plotting.
You can absolutely win the argument and still face the backlash simply because you've threatened someone's social capital and their grip on power.
Exactly.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something to really picture in your mind's eye as we wrap up. Consider the ordinary pilgrims.
The crowds watching all this.
Yes, the men, women, and children who traveled hundreds of miles for Passover, just standing in the temple courtyard watching this entire spectacle unfold. These ordinary people were caught right in the middle, crushed between an oppressive Roman regime on one side and these powerful, wealthy religious elites on the other.
Yeah, just trying to survive.
And they just watched a lone rabbi from Galilee take on the titans of their society and leave them completely speechless. When that chilling silence finally fell over the temple courtyard, what do you think was running through the minds of that crowd? Did they feel a sudden rush of triumph? Or did they realize in that quiet, terribly tense moment that they had just watched a man seal his own death warrant simply by winning a debate?
That is an incredibly haunting image to leave off on. Stepping into the room, taking the microphone, and knowing that your absolute victory in that moment is exactly what's going to cost you everything.
Yeah, it really is.
Now, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's intense historical drama. What stood out to you the most about the political maneuvering, the specific traps we just broke down, or the way those factions operated? Let us know in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed today's deep dive into the source material and found this breakdown helpful, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on our future content. It really helps us continue making these deep dives for you. Also, do not forget to check the description below. We have included some exclusive links related to the show that you're definitely going to want to check out. If you thought the tension in the Jerusalem temple today was high, just wait. The next deep dive is going to be even more intense, and you absolutely won't want to miss it. Thanks for learning with us today, and we'll catch you next time.